And this is the least of our problems. Okay, let me preface this review by saying that the original MegaRace wasn't a perfect game by any means, but it was enjoyable. It had a lot of neat features, a lot of spectacular visuals for the time, a subtle yet funny sense of humor centered around a future where the average person just watches TV all day long, pampered by robots and technology, but most importantly, it was easy to play yet tough to master with a solid difficulty curve. Save for the orbital junkyard track, which is just plain evil. Today's ancient DOS game, MegaRace 2, has very few neat features, bland, generic visuals, a sense of humor which has a handful of funny moments but mostly just comes across as awkward, and the difficulty curve starts at maximum, and yet somehow manages to find ways to get even harder. But with all that said, here's the very odd thing about this game. It's competently programmed. I wouldn't say masterfully programmed, but given what this game does, it actually works and is playable. It's weird. Usually if the design is bad, the code is bad. But this is one of those really strange cases where the design is terrible, but the code is fine. And you'd think it was just designed by somebody entirely different, or... what do you know? It kind of explains a few things. But yeah, MegaRace 2 is a step in the wrong direction for the series, as far as its overall design and presentation. But all things said, it is still playable and meshes its FMV system together with its 3D rendering system surprisingly well. And I should also point out that I've been in touch with Christian Eriksen, the actor behind the performance of Lance Boyle, and he assures me that for the upcoming MegaRace reboot, most of the inspiration is coming from the first game, not the second one. So you can kind of think of this review as a look into how you can screw up your game franchise so badly that it takes virtually 2 decades to recover from it. MegaRace 2 was developed by Cryo Interactive Entertainment and published through Mindscape in 1996. Now, unlike the original MegaRace, which technically wasn't a racing game, since the goal is to destroy your opposition before completing a race, MegaRace 2 definitely qualifies as a combat racing game, given that you have weapons and you can destroy your opponents, but the main goal is to complete the laps and get as high a position as possible. The game has dynamic video mode switching, and switches between 3 different video modes. It uses 320x200 256 color VGA graphics for any FMV sequences you simply watch, SVGA 640x480 256 color graphics for the menus and the user interface, while the gameplay runs in a tweaked VGA 320x400 graphics mode. As an example of poor game design in action, if a 16-color VGA menu system was made available, or if the menus were done with the tweaked VGA 320x400 mode, there would have been no need for this game to require SVGA graphics support, which would make it more accessible to other people. Then again, it came out in 1996, and by then most gamers had SVGA-capable graphics cards anyways. In terms of audio support, it actually supports quite a number of cards, though for setting the game up in DOSBox, going with Sound Blaster support is probably your simplest approach. As for its current release date, it's still commercial, and those of you who are curious about this thing can actually pick up a dirt cheap digital download from the newly established Zoom Platform website at www.zoom-platform.com, where all 3 MegaRace games are available for $3 each, or you can get the entire trilogy of games for $5.50. Also, for some odd reason, you can buy the first and second game together by themselves for $3 total, which is odd given that the first 2 games are each $3 individually. But when I inquired about this, apparently it had something to do with the rights to the games or something, and that the Zoom platform guys weren't really able to do much about it. At least for the time being. All 3 MegaRace games are also available on GOG, but the pricing works out better on Zoom. The physical copies of the game aren't too common, but they're not too rare either. Unless you go looking for a boxed copy, in which case, good freaking luck. Loose copies can be picked up for dirt cheap because most copies are sold directly in jewel cases and not in a box. Jewel case only copies can be found for about $7 to $15. Boxed copies, well, I have no idea because I wasn't able to source one, thus I imagine they go for quite a bit when they do show up.
Something else that gives me a lot of pleasure is my desirable assistant, Mindy. Isn't she gorgeous? Tell us about that exciting new body you're wearing, Candy.
You like it?
How should I know? I haven't tried it yet.
Before we get started with the actual gameplay, I should mention that the game's humor has taken a very unusual turn from the first MegaRace game. In the original MegaRace, Lance Boyle was portrayed as a sort of game show host, wore simple yet flashy threads, had a fast sense of humor, never missed a beat, and didn't need a laugh track or a sidekick, leading to some very memorable dialogue which fans of the original game can still recite even to this day. MegaRace 2, however, ran a completely different direction with the game show concept, and in a very strange way, tried to make it more wacky and zany, as though the character of Lance Boyle wasn't enough to hold the weight of what he was doing. As a result, many of the jokes this time around aren't even remotely subtle, and some of the same jokes are used over and over again to the point where they stop being funny, such as Lance wanting to fire everyone, including himself. There's also a variety of extremely odd outfits on display, and guest appearances to completely break the experience. It's a shame too, because the acting is solid, but the direction and scripting are insufferable. I should say though that there are a few glimmers of real humor in the scripting, such as this line.
Alien space being, I guess you'd like to marry my assistant. Go on, you can tell me.
I already did. We've decided to call the baby Lance.
Well, how about that? A little slime ball called Lance. That's something I'd like to see.
But wait, now let's completely spoil the joke.
Try looking in a mirror sometime. Just kidding.
But wait, now let's completely spoil the joke even more.
Don't worry, I'm not gonna fire you. Just kidding.
I've said it before and I'll say it again. If you can't figure it out, don't worry. Nobody's gonna hurt you. Just lie back and think how happy you are. So let's get to the actual gameplay. And just like with the original MegaRace, the game uses pre-rendered full-motion video for the track itself. And unfortunately, many of these track designs are very bland and have a lot of browns and grays in their color schemes. Plus, there's only 6 track designs, unlike the original game which had 14. Now, admittedly, a part of the reasoning for having fewer tracks is because the new designs have an interesting dynamic where paths can branch off into other paths. Plus, if you get turned around, there's a number of reverse direction stills to help you get turned back the right way. Yeah, one thing you have to get used to immediately is that the game no longer locks your car to a horizontal plane. You now have full control over turning and acceleration. Which may sound cool in theory, but it only takes a few races to realize that this format is far more problematic than it needs to be. The first major issue is the camera angle. Because you were locked to horizontally sliding side to side in the original game, the pre-rendered visuals also had to follow a perfect line down the tracks, ultimately giving a roller coaster kind of feel that was easy to set your mind into. MegaRace 2's pre-rendered visuals, however, take full advantage of the 3D nature of the gameplay, and thus the camera is much more floaty, giving more dynamic views of the track as you race along it. In terms of the spectacle, this isn't a bad idea. But in terms of actually playing the game, this is incredibly disorienting, because the camera is not moving along with the direction the track is, making it extremely difficult to perform turns since you can't actually tell where the turn begins or ends due to the camera not moving precisely along with the track. The next major issue comes up with the actual format of the gameplay. The original MegaRace was all about shooting down cars with lots of firepower before the race was finished. MegaRace 2 is actually a proper racing game, meaning you need to be in the #1 position at the end of the race or as close to #1 as possible if you want a chance to survive into the later parts of the game. Given how much harder it is to control your vehicle here than it was in the first game, this is a much more difficult prospect than it seems, despite the game adjusting vehicle speeds depending on position. And yeah, this is one of those racing games where your speed is dependent on how close to the lead you are, with all opponents getting similar boosts the further back they are. Though I will say that the speed differences by position are extremely tiny, so once you're in the lead, so long as you're driving well and surviving the nausea-inducing camera angles, you should be able to maintain that lead. And if you lose it, so long as it's not by too much, it shouldn't be too hard to get it back, even if you're not driving perfectly. However, this is the perfect lead-in for something that completely infuriates me with this thing. Money. And one of the drawbacks to any combat-based racing game involving an in-game monetary system is that your progress can sometimes be directly linked to how much money you're making, how much damage you're taking, how much ammunition you're using, or in the case of MegaRace 2, all three of these things. You could be making first place consistently, but if you're also constantly ending each race with barely any integrity left, you're going to be spending all of that money on repairs and won't have enough left for more ammunition. Worse than that, most of the weapons in this game only cause damage. They don't actually do much of anything towards slowing vehicles down. And because the AI racers can repair their damage between rounds just like you can, trying to use weapons against your opponents almost becomes self-defeating in a strange and annoying way. Also, when you start the game, you only get a choice between 3 cars, but immediately after the first race, all the other cars unlock. But what's weird about this is that you already can get the fastest car right from the start, so there's virtually no reason to switch to another vehicle if you have the money to do so. And actually saving up enough money to switch to another vehicle is virtually impossible. I should point out though that there is a variety of weapons, as useless as they may seem to be. You have 3 forms of missiles, light, medium, and heavy, with the heavy missiles also having homing capabilities. You can also buy mines and oil slicks, which you can drop behind you. Mines cause very little damage, oil slicks slow opponents down very briefly. There's also a shield system you can buy, and attempting any race without this thing is suicide. Actually, each race is split into 3 rounds. In the first round, it's you against 7 other opponents vying for position and points across 5 laps, with the last place finisher being eliminated. In the next round, you do another 5 laps, but this time you need to make the top 4 in total points over both rounds to advance, and the obstacles are placed in different spots. The final round is only 3 laps long and disables all weapons and obstacles, meaning the only thing stopping you from winning is bad driving. Though, speaking of track obstacles, that's another thing which really bothers me about the design of this game. The original MegaRace had a whole bunch of symbols littered on the track, signifying things like speeding up and slowing up and maybe even blowing up. But the variety of symbols is partly what made those tracks fun, because you actually had to memorize the layouts in order to get the most points and the best outcomes, even though you could still win without really understanding what all the symbols meant without knowing where they were. MegaRace 2 has no track symbols, and in fact only has 3 kinds of track obstacles you can even encounter. Explosive bombs, blocks which just slow you down, and traffic cones which really don't do much of anything. Basically, the tracks feel lifeless and pointless, not helped by them being much more narrow overall than the original MegaRace tracks, making it just that much harder to navigate down them in the first place. In-game, Lance Boyle claims MegaRace 2 is more brutal than MegaRace 1. This is a blatant and outright lie, and whoever scripted that line probably looked back on the completed project and just shook his head, wishing he knew sooner how the game was going to turn out. Because MegaRace 2, despite all the effort which went into it, is just plain lame. The new features it offered from a technical standpoint really did have the potential to push the game into new ground of merging FMV with real-time rendering. But ultimately, having the split paths in the tracks and proper 3D rendering of the vehicles was only cool from a programming standpoint, and the overarching design simply wasn't enough to make those features worth it. This is another one of those games I can't really recommend, although I will say that there are very slight redeeming factors, so you could certainly play games worse than this one. Plus, it's really cheap nowadays, so if you just want to satisfy your curiosity and give it a run yourself, yeah, it's always an option. Setting this game up in DOSBox is simple enough. Just set cycles to max and you should be good to go. You'll know if you didn't set the cycles up correctly if the game stalls at any moment when trying to load anything. The actual physical version of the game comes with 2 discs, but I think it's possible to install enough data that it only needs to see 1 disc to run, though I'm not entirely certain on this point, as I've never owned a physical copy. In any case, make yourself a couple ISOs and image mount at least one of them and you should be good to go. Though if both are required, let me know and I can add that info to the additional information and correction section below this video on my website. I should also quickly point out that while the game has joystick and mouse controls available, you should steer clear from both of them. The joystick controls work, but require you to hold up to accelerate and are extremely twitchy. The mouse controls, on the other hand, are surprisingly effective for driving, but it disables most of the keyboard controls in the process, including the fire buttons, meaning you can't use your weapons while controlling the game with the mouse. Anywho, that's all for this episode of Ancient DOS Games. Again, sorry for this episode going up late, but the past few days have been extremely difficult for me. Episode 162 should be going up 1 week from now, on Wednesday, May 13th, and then following that, I should be able to get back on schedule and have episode 163 up on Saturday, May 16th. As for the hint for the next episode, let's just say it's a sequel with civilians that you can accidentally hurt, where the original game didn't have civilians. If you think you know which game that could be, then send your guess to adg@pixelships.com and stay tuned because I'm not about to let a few life issues keep me from giving you all a steady stream of entertaining videos to watch.